Grace, distinction, and power. Those are the three characteristics that define the Storm Javelin. Unlike its three counterparts, it doesn't rely completely on heavy machinery and bullets to dominate its enemies. It uses the power of the Shaper gods to hover high in the sky and rain ice, fire, and thunder on the unsuspecting masses that would do us harm. Also, the Storm Javelin has a cape, and capes are awesome. The Storm Javelin takes a completely different approach to battle than the Ranger, Colossus, and Interceptor. Instead of fighting boots on the ground, it spends most of its time hovering and raining death from above with powerful abilities and long-range weapons. The Storm can dodge once in any direction just like the Ranger, but its dodge has a longer cooldown. It also cannot double jump. Instead, pressing the jump button twice activates a glide. It makes up for that minor deficit with significantly increased hover time and an increased shield strength while hovering. The ability to hover for longer than the average Javelin allows the Storm to use height advantages to survey the battlefield. Though this vantage point leaves you open to enemy fire, the increased shield strength and the ability to fly away when you've attracted too much attention makes the Storm one of the safest Javelins to pilot. For support abilities, the Storm can choose between Wind Wall and Quickening Field. Wind Wall places a tall barrier in front of you that blocks enemy projectiles, but allows you and your team to fire through. Quickening Field increases the gear recharge rate of you and all allies who enter the field by 20% for 10 seconds. You do not need to stay inside the field to keep the effect. The Storm's combo property is Chain Combo. Detonating a primed target will spread their prime effect to nearby enemies. In other words, burning targets will spread their burn, and frozen targets will spread their freeze. The Storm's melee attack is a detonator. When used on the ground, it's a single target attack, and when used from the air, it deals damage in a small area around the point of impact. Finally, the Storm's ultimate ability is called Elemental Storm. It sends out 3 large elemental attacks one at a time, and each attack primes then detonates the enemies caught in the area of effect. Although the Storm is listed as a glass cannon, it can be played as a hybrid damage dealer and crowd control expert. Its default loadout speaks to that playstyle directly. The Focused Seal Frost Shards is a low damage multi-charge ability with almost no cooldown that sends out shards of ice that freeze enemies after enough hits. Lightning Strike is a detonator that deals high damage with a low cooldown. Using both abilities together to leverage the Storm's combo property will allow you to keep huge groups of enemies locked down for your team to melt, but you'll probably get bored with this build quickly unless you spice it up with the right weapons. Although the Storm is a space wizard, a setup based around ice and detonation would benefit greatly from components that buff the Storm's guns, and guns that benefit from hovering. The reason being, at higher difficulties and against epic and legendary enemies, a single combo won't be enough to kill. If controlling enemies and filling them with bullets isn't your thing, and you'd rather feel like a god of destruction, swap Lightning Strike for Living Flame and Frost Shards for Burning Orb, and you've transformed yourself into a high damage fire mage. Living Flame sends out a slow-moving target-seeking projectile that will damage and prime every enemy it touches. Burning Orb is a multi-charge ability that can be fired rapidly or charged to deal increased damage in an area of effect around the point of impact. Send out Living Flame to prime multiple enemies, then blow them up one by one or in a big group with Burning Orb for massive damage and ultimate energy gains. Overall, the Storm is a relatively straightforward character compared to the Colossus and Interceptor, but the challenge comes from changing your approach to battle. If you're new to Anthem, there's a good chance you don't fully grasp the level of freedom and control each of the Javelins have over vertical space. The Storm is the master of the skies, so understanding that you should always be in the air is critical to your success with this suit. Additionally, even when you're fully kitted with the best components and weapons, the Storm is not a tank or a god. You can't hover in the face of hundreds of enemies and expect to survive forever. If you're playing at an appropriate difficulty for your level of equipment, you'll need to constantly reposition to avoid getting focus fired and shot down. One final note about dominating the sky, pay attention to your heat gauge. Overheating will force your Javelin to the ground and you won't be able to hover or fly until your heat dissipates. For the other Javelins, this isn't as big of a deal, but to the Storm, the floor is lava. Finally, knowledge of the different prime effects, what they do, and how they benefit your team is important. Ice freezes enemies in place, which is great crowd control. Fire burns them, causing damage over time, and applying the fire status to a frozen enemy will remove the freeze effect. This will mess up crowd control, but will set them up for another prime and detonation. The shock status deals a burst of damage when applied, then periodically damages nearby enemies, and lastly, acid increases a target's damage taken. That's a lot of information to take in, but if you want to be graceful, distinct, and powerful, it's worth learning. And there we go, that's going to do it for the overview of the Storm Javelin. If you're used to playing the Interceptor, the Colossus, and the Ranger, and you switch over to the Storm, you might think, oh, it's kind of boring to just hover around all the time, but as soon as you start sending fireballs and lightning strikes down at the ground, you'll quickly realize that it is a good time. With all of that said, we're going to wrap things up here, but don't worry, there is plenty more to come. I'm working on some builds for the Storm, so I'm going to show those off pretty soon, and we've got more builds for the Colossus and Ranger, and then the Interceptor. That is going to be the last overview that we do for the Javelin suits, and I'm excited for it. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Anthem, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.